held monthly. We hold it, and it's designated and designed to support leaders in systems of care. And that could be in states, communities, tribes, territories, and includes those both with and without federal grants. And we try to make it relevant to all jurisdictions. It's designed for leaders with many roles in systems of care. Those include directors of systems of care, also leaders in various children's systems and various content areas and so on. And we do try to be responsive to your needs and to address topics that are important and helpful to you in your work. We welcome suggestions from you as to what topics you'd like to see addressed in the learning community in future sessions, so please feel free to reach out to us for that. Before I get started, I'd like to let you know and acknowledge that we're in a new world where responding to COVID is a top priority. We recognize that this is a tough time for all of us in children's service systems across the country, and especially for the children, youth, and families that we serve. We know that you're all involved in responding in your states and communities, and we at the TA Network want to make sure that we're supporting your efforts around COVID-19 by providing you with resources and support for this. And we've created a Managing Now for a Better Tomorrow initiative to accomplish this, focusing both on what we can do now and also to create solutions as we move forward to new phases. We've hosted a series of conversations for various groups to interact with both presenters and peers, and recordings of those are available on our website. We also have resources for you, like a tip sheet on crisis communications during COVID-19, state-by-state information on coverage for telehealth services, which have taken on new importance during this time, and others that you can find on our website. And so in the midst of this pandemic, we've also created a series on leadership in the time of COVID-19 as part of our learning community. We do like this learning community to be as interactive as possible. And even with large groups like today, we would like to have the group interact both with your peers and with the presenters. So we encourage you to put your questions, comments, insights in the chat box throughout the session. Ellen will be asking you to put some ideas in the chat box at various junctures in her presentation as well. And we have incorporated time for questions and answers, and we'll do our best to address as many of the questions as you enter into the chat box as we can, given the size of the group that's participating today. Just below the chat box, you will see a box that will allow you to download today's PowerPoint. I think the link will be in the chat box also. And as a follow-up, you'll get the link to the recording of this webinar as well. There will be some other resources that you could download today also, and the links for that will be provided. Also, at the end of the session, you will see a link that will pop up for a very brief evaluation survey. And we would very much appreciate your taking just a few moments before logging out to complete that and give us your feedback. We take it very seriously, and we do use it to improve our future learning sessions. I'd like to mention, as you see on this slide, our new learning management system called Ideas at the Institute. This is a platform that allows our learning communities to be more interactive, and it's a digital hub where you can join the various learning communities that we offer. You can register for webinars, find recordings of previous webinars and related resources. And this picture shows you what you will see when you get to the learning community page. And you will be able to learn about the various learning communities and sign up in the ones that you are interested in. Before we move into introducing our presenter today and the topic, let me let you know that we do have American Sign Language interpretation available during today's session. To pin or make the ASL interpreter's web camera your primary web camera, please hover over the web camera image and click on the pin icon. And if you click on their name, Kelly Sosby and Nicole Lobo, their web camera will remain on for you throughout the meeting. I also want to alert you to the next learning community sessions before we begin. 2 additional sessions on leadership will take place on June 30th and June 22nd and July 22nd. Also in June, we'll be offering a session on using social media for system of care expansion that 2 of our members of our social media and social marketing team will be presenting. That will be on June 17th. So we hope you'll put those dates on your calendar, June 30th, July 22nd, June 17th, and join us for those. Links to register for the June sessions will be in the chat box. All of these are also available in the TA Telegram that you receive weekly on Mondays, and you will get some links for registration in the follow-up email that you will receive from this session. So again, today's session is focusing on adaptive leadership in the time of COVID-19, and this is the first in the series. The second will focus on strategies for leading remote or virtual teams, which we know many of you are dealing with now. And the third will tackle personal self-awareness of leadership energy and strategies that you can use and apply during this stressful time for you. So we're very fortunate to have an outstanding presenter for this series, Ellen Kagen. Ellen has been a pioneer on leadership in systems serving youth and their families, and many of you might already be familiar with her work. She's a founder and co-director of the leadership program at the Georgetown University Center for Child and Human Development and led many of Georgetown's well-known leadership academies. And parenthetically, I had the pleasure of working with Ellen at Georgetown for many years, probably around 30, but who's counting? And she's also a founding partner of the Coach Approach Partners and president of the Georgetown Leadership Associates. And I'd like to thank Ellen for her great work in putting this series together. The objectives for this session are looking at disruptions that are caused by COVID-19, considering the definition of leadership and the differences between leadership and authority and management, and also looking at adaptive leadership strategies and skills and how that needs to be changed and adapted for this era of COVID-19 and then moving forward into the future. So now I'm going to turn this over to Ellen, who will get us started. Ellen? Ellen, unmute yourself, please.
Hello and good afternoon to everyone. It's really wonderful to see all of the names come up on the chat, and I'm very, very pleased that so many of you have joined us today. As Beth mentioned, we have been co-partners in this journey of developing systems of care. Of course, I was 12 when I started, let's just say, but it has been a long journey, and actually that informs a lot of what I'm going to share with you and speak to you about today, about what it means to lead change, what it means to lead adaptively. And it's not like we are unfamiliar with this, because as people in systems of care, the whole movement was created because we were not satisfied with the way in which service delivery systems were functioning. And all the people that preceded us have been working very hard for the last 30 years, as Beth mentioned, to create the systems as to where we are today. But we are in a very interesting and unique time. And some people call this the age of disruption. And I don't have to go into all of the details, but what we have seen in the last 2 months alone has been unprecedented in the world. In fact, what's really exciting about teaching leadership and teaching adaptations is that we now have one common global example of how we are all both individually facing adaptive work, and how we are actually facing adaptive work in our organizations, our teams, our agencies, and our communities. We've gone in the last 2 months with 70 million people, up from 7 million, now working at home, working remotely due to COVID-19. That statistic actually was from a few weeks ago. When we put the PowerPoint together, it could be even higher. There have been, as you know, that don't have to say, huge disruptions. Our workflow is completely uncertain. We have all had to reprioritize what we're doing, and policies and budgets have had to be re-engineered in order to meet a very urgent pandemic response. Now, what that means is, because we're in so much disruption, it's going to mean that the future is going to look different from the past. One of those is that we can expect huge budget shortfalls. The amount of resource that's going into our economy now is going to lead us to be thinking about what that future is going to look like. The economic impact on children and families that we serve, the economic impact on us as well. And I thought we would start just this conversation by, again, putting your fingers to the keyboard and kind of putting out there, just so we can kind of get our headspace into what this challenge is all about. What have been some of the huge disruptions in your environment? And this can be either within yourself or within what you've seen in your workflow. So let's just get a whole slew of those out so that we can just actually see what's been happening. 900 people strong. There shouldn't be a person who hasn't seen some disruption. Beautiful. Right. So we've had to actually figure out things we never had to figure out before. How are we co-locating in our workspaces now that our children are learning at home? Now that we have everybody working remotely and figuring out how we deal with the varying degrees of tech readiness. We've had to have like split screen lives, attending to our loved ones and attending to our work, and actually all the anxiety about our future economic health and the uncertainty about how long we're going to be staying at home. And all of this is happening to us in response to a very, very challenging pandemic. But here's the crazy thing. I want to actually invite you in this hour that we have together to turn this negative into an amazing positive. I'd like to actually throw out the idea that we are in an age where we don't have to choose whether we're going to adapt. We are going to have to adapt. They used to say adapt or become extinct. And I think all of us are beginning to feel that in some way or another. And throwing out this term, necessity is the mother of invention, what that means is really looking at a difficult situation and trying to become inspired to create novel or ingenious solutions. Ingenious solutions. And humankind has been doing this forever. We needed to give light. We figured that out. We needed clean clothes. We needed to communicate with each other over the miles. We needed to travel long distances. And so if you think about how the generations before, they never had those things which are commonplace to us today, it's the same thing that we are actually going to be leading and embedding the changes. I want to quote Albert Einstein, one of my favorite thought leaders in this work of change. And he said, in the middle of difficulty lies opportunity. In the middle of difficulty lies opportunity. And this is exactly it from my perspective in working with system of care leaders for decades now. This is the kind of mindset that helps us create the future. And we've already done this. We had to figure out how to prevent fragmentation. We had to figure out how to create home and community-based services. We had to figure out how to link to schools. We had to figure out how to be more data-driven. We had to figure out how to bring the voices of youth and family with lived experience, not only to the table, but to be part of the service delivery system. I mention all of this to you because we have been adapting and leading adaptive change for decades. Now, in order to keep in this mindset of necessity is the mother of invention, and within great difficulty lies opportunity, we as leaders have to live in the future, even as we're coping with issues today. And I want to offer to you 4 questions that I ask myself every single morning since this pandemic began, of how I can stay in the leadership mindset of living not only in the present with all of the stresses and the anxiety that each of us feels, but how we actually live into the future. So you can see these 4 questions. When you get the PowerPoint in your inbox, I would encourage you to print this slide and remember these questions. How can I and my team contribute to the COVID-19 response? So this is kind of an immediate thing. What can I do every single day? We're going to talk about that. How can my team and I maintain a focus on our overall strategic goals, even in the context of this crisis? So I put this question here because I want to remind you that you all probably are operating off of some level of strategic plan. And believe it or not, the pandemic didn't erase those. They are still there. The challenges that we faced in early March are still going to be there as we work through the challenges that we have now. And I want us to keep an eye on making sure that we don't lose sight of those really important goals around the service delivery system, around financing, around data, around collaboration between the agencies. The last 2 questions are really very, very personal, because leadership, as those of you who have studied with me, is a very personal learning journey. Leadership happens from the inside out. And the 3rd question is, what is the potential hidden opportunity that this crisis is opening up for me? What is it about this crisis that could actually create a new way of thinking for you? And what opportunity exists for you to strengthen your workforce or your community? When I say your workforce, I think about your teams as you are working with your teams. Now, in order to do this, the first thing I want to be clear about is that the word leadership often connotes many different ideas inside people's thinking. So I want to just take a few minutes to anchor what, in this context, we are talking about what is leadership. So you have to know what that is in order to do that, and you have to know how leadership is different from some of the other things that you do. And we're going to briefly talk about that. You have to develop the skills, the habits, and when I say habit, I mean like the mindset habits and the behaviors of leadership. And then lastly, you need to believe that you can lead. And when I say that leadership is more important than ever before, it wasn't easy prior to COVID-19, and it's going to be even more complex and challenging now because of the stance we are going to have to be taking. So the purpose of this webinar and others and other leadership conversations you're in is preparation. This kind of leadership is not for the weak of heart. It's not necessarily to be in total innovation, but it's also to lead yourself, to center yourself as you are leading others. And you're going to use leadership as well as using your authority. And in this case, your authority comes from your role, your position, your job description. And leadership is both present focused, as I mentioned a moment ago, because you have to stay grounded, but it's also the opportunity to lead us into the future, because what happens next is completely dependent upon each of you. So let's take a moment and just talk for a minute about what is leadership. This is really, really fundamental as we talk about leadership. In this case, it's a verb. Leadership is a verb. It's about an action. It's about what you do. It's not about your position or defined by your role. Now, in this case, on the right-hand side, we're going to talk about this idea of your leadership defined by your role is really your formal authority. It's the power vested in you by performing certain acts, For some of you, it's your job description and your title. For some of you, it's the certification or the licensure that you have, or the degree that you hold, or where you sit in the organizational hierarchy. That's your authority. On the left-hand side is this idea of being a leader in leadership. And leadership is a process. And in this process, you increase your social influence. And that social influence increase results in your capacity to mobilize others so that everyone can learn together and create something that's collective and achieve something that you share. And I will tell you, I have spent more than the better part of my time working with people who have formal authority, but perhaps don't have yet the capacity to provide leadership. And I have met quite the many people in my work with system of care leaders who have no formal authority or minimal formal authority, but have shown great leadership in creating systems change. So in this construct here between leadership and authority being two very different types of being and ways of being, we can see on the left we have formal leaders who have formal authority. They're appointed, hired, or promoted. They have positions. But we also have these informal leaders. So no matter where you sit. And people who have informal authority earn their authority through their contributions, their competence, their excellence in the work. So to summarize, leadership is a process. Envisioning and initiating change, mobilizing others to alter the current state of affairs in response, in our case, to an urgent challenge or an exciting opportunity. So it's a process. If you love process and process skills, you're going to take to duck like water in leadership. Leadership is also a behavior. Not just a process, it's also a behavior. And it's a behavior that embraces relationships. It's all about the connectivity between us and our people. If you don't like people, even the people you don't like, you will perhaps be challenged in your leadership. So I would encourage you to think about embracing relationships, even with difficult people. And it's a behavior that embraces change as its essential goal. And so we're trying to create a better and stronger future. And lastly, it's an awareness. And this is so critical because in every given moment, leaders, system of care leaders, each and every one of you, you have a choice. You always have a choice. We call it in leadership a choice point, where you can choose what your behavior is going to be. You can choose your stance. You can choose how you relate to someone else. You can choose even how we're relating, even in the difficulties that we have. And I have here just an example that in one moment, you can strengthen a relationship. You can bring clarity. You can ask a good question that brings people together. Or in that very same moment, even without thinking about it, you could shut someone down or show your frustration or blame other people or choose not to be engaged. I call sometimes that bottom half, the or, what's below the or, as very human. I mean, we're going to feel frustrated. We're going to feel tired. We're going to want to nap on the couch because we just can't go another hour. All that is okay. It just means in those moments, we're not behaving leaderly and we've chosen a different stance to take, and all that is okay. Remembering that when you're with your teams, when you're with your communities, they are going to be looking and craving your leadership behavior. And so in this context, leadership does not have to come from above. In fact, we like to say in the Leadership Academy that leadership can come and does come from any chair. And in this case, it can apply to every aspect of your life. You lead your families, you lead your communities, you lead your work, your teams. It's every aspect of your life. It is a personal journey. What you need to learn about leadership is different from my ongoing work in leadership. And it's also a 24/7 experience and a choice that we can make. Now, what's interesting about this particular time for us is that I say it's a choice. And interestingly, it also is a choice about who wants change. Now, prior to COVID-19, if I were to ask this question simply in the context of system of care development and the kinds of changes we desperately seek for our communities, the support we want to create, the networks we want to provide so that nobody falls through the cracks, everybody would say they want to change. And then what we often think about in leadership is who wants to change. There's this idea in leadership that the status quo is very fine for me. Thank you very much. I'd rather just stay the way I am. But what's interesting about this slide is that for many of us, in this case, we have not been asked who wants to change. We've not been asked. We've actually been placed in change. We've been put in these situations. The urgency was so high that within a very brief period of time, our entire world had to change. And so imagine the systems that you're in as it was making choices about how the work would continue to flow, the resistance we felt, the anxiety we felt, the uncertainty we felt, the complexity we felt, the ambiguity we felt. And all of those feelings are really just this resistance, because I liked getting up every morning. I liked going to my office. I loved being with my colleagues. And all of a sudden, we're told from this moment forward, you're working at home. So the system itself was resisting change, as were we as individuals. As I think about what we have gone through as leaders personally. And I often think about this idea that Peter Senge put on our table a long time ago, one of the very first people to start talking about why leadership was so important. He basically said that if change is going to happen out there, the changes are not only going to be out there, they're actually going to be in us, in the way we think about things, in the way we approach things, in the way we interact with each other. I think about the people even now who are working so hard to learn how to build intimate connections online, remotely, virtually. By changing even how we embrace technology, for example, can make or break our ability to actually have people feel what we're saying, even as we're talking to a computer screen. 2 months ago, I would have never thought this was possible. But only changing by the way we change our approach to things will we be able to change the reality on the ground. And for all of you, myself included, I have felt really interesting personal resistance to this change, but I've also felt an incredible tug that the leadership skills that are needed now are stronger than ever, just like I think what Nancy has put out in the chat. Before we move on, I wanted to also share with you, just to put some context to this, is my colleague Bob Quinn at the University of Michigan did this really interesting study that I've always kind of hung on to because it was so important and impactful for me. When I think about he did a study of strategic plans, and what he found was one organization called themselves, their mission was to be an organic organization. That's what they called themselves. One that is responsive, acts quickly in a coordinated way, and can adjust and learn and grow, right? So if you read something like that, how many of you would want to work for an organization like that? Okay, in the chat. Anybody? I mean, should we give this like a hooray? I would work for that organization in like 2 seconds. Because I would want to be in a space that wasn't rigid, wasn't bound by, little tiny things. But what was interesting about what Bob said, Bob Quinn, was that wasn't what was interesting to him. What was really interesting to him was the next part of the plan. And that was that only organic individuals can create organic organizations. So what does that mean? that means that only people, us, who can adjust and learn and grow, can react quickly, only we, if we can do that, we can create organizations like this. And I put this out there to say, this is the stance that will lead change in this pandemic. That if we have organic individuals, us, you and me, who can be responsive, act quickly and in a coordinated way, and can adjust and learn and grow, we can model that. We can be the role models for our communities that are really struggling. We can all struggle together. So I put this out there as a challenge, really, for all of us, because I know myself, there have been days I haven't wanted to get out of bed, just pull the covers over my head and call it a day. And then there are other days when I wake up and I am completely invigorated and I don't feel helpless and I don't feel hopeless. I may not actually always know what to do next, but here's a framework I wanted to share with you as you think about your leadership. This is put out by the work of Daniel Goleman, who, as many of you may know, wrote Emotional Intelligence. And there are two sides to this. The left-hand side and the first side is, who are we as leaders? Who are we as people? And he called that personal competence, the self-awareness, and in the green puzzle piece, the ability to manage our emotions and to manage our feelings. So that as we are feeling frustrated, the awareness of that, or as we are feeling lonely and the awareness of that turns into action when you actually address and put actions into place that help you bring about a different state of being. So self-awareness and self-management, really, really important. And if it's really hard and too hard and you need support, by all means, we all need support. In the leadership frame, these are the competencies we're going to want to strive for, even in these challenges. On the left-hand side, on the right-hand side is social competence. So we've got personal competence, and now we're in the social domain, because leadership is a very socially based set of activities. Remember, I said it was a behavior that's relationship-based. And so we come into the social arena, and now we're working remotely, and we're going to be talking about this at the next webinar. We have to have that social awareness. So who's with us? Who's not with us? What's my presence looking like today with my team? If I'm distracted, if I'm not present for them, then are they going to be modeling my behavior? What energy am I putting into the room? My social awareness, and then recognizing that I have to manage all the relationships of the people in my team who have different needs, a different set of opportunities exist with them, and not only just staying within my team or in my safety, but what's the opportunity for managing and building relationships even outside of my direct sphere of influence. So we've just said that leadership is not authority. I'm going to quickly say, just for the sake of time, and hopefully I'll be able to learn with many of you into the future, that leadership is also not management. Management focuses on stability and order and processes that are policies and clarity and procedures. Leadership is a little messier as we talk about it. It's also not advocacy, which is a close sister relationship to leadership. Both advocacy and leadership focus attention on very important issues, but we use different types of processes to get things done. In the leadership domain, we are really responsible for mobilizing the resources to actually make something happen We rely very heavily on our advocacy sisters to help us maintain that pressure from the outside to actually get things done. So I'm just going to quickly flip through some of these slides because I really want to shift into this notion of really thinking about what is our challenge. What is our challenge in this moment of change? And I really sort of love these two little pictures that are on your screen because they really approximate what we're all experiencing right now. First of all, the surging speed of change that we are having to actually lead within. And then the second one, which is it's time to change. It's kind of a softer, quieter little voice that helps us consider what we need to do, and it's time. So if we haven't adapted, it's time. Now, what happens in leadership and what's challenging to leadership is that the external events create a crisis response. It creates us thinking that everything is chaos. Everything is chaos. And sometimes when that happens, we move into that really quickly tamping down, figuring it out. And I want to offer to you in this next part of our conversation is I want us to get on top of that feeling of feeling like we are in a crisis and actually begin to relax into and settle into this idea that we want to live in the future, not so much in the present, live into the future and begin thinking about where are we going? Where are we going? And where am I going to lead my agency and my team as we go into the future? Now, that doesn't mean, of course, that we have responses to COVID-19. And I think as you've seen, I think the TA network, SAMHSA and others have really mobilized, health departments have mobilized, and many of you, I'm sure, have been kind of called away from your regular duties to actually respond to COVID-19, and that's awesome. And we need really the opportunity to live within these chaotic and challenging environments, and I want to put out something that I don't have a PowerPoint for, but I would love if everybody would write this down because we'll be using it again in the series that we'll be speaking together. I'm speaking, you're writing, so thank you very much for that. And that is this acronym. It's VUCA, VUCA, VUCA. Now, some of you may have heard this. It's a term that was coined by Warren Bennis and Bert Nanas actually a long time ago, but has now come kind of more into the leadership literature. And what that stands for is V for VUCA, V for volatility, V for volatility, U for uncertainty, C for complexity, and A for ambiguity. VUCA. Maybe, Denise, you can actually just write that into the chat. VUCA, beautiful. Denise, I love it. We've been working together for so long, our brains are like one. So in this VUCA environment, I want to use that term instead of crisis for us to be thinking about leading within VUCA. And in the context of what has to happen, we are leading in this state of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. So I want to sort of step back and now turn the conversation over to you, because I really want you to think about and step back for a moment and kind of get out of your crisis orientation for just a moment and think about something that you're addressing or that you'd like to address during the time of the COVID-19 crisis. Meaning in this VUCA environment, I would like to do XYZ, which I'd like to see in your chat. And I think I could do it better if I had stronger, clearer, more strategic leadership skills. Okay? And that challenge that you can put out there could either be like with one person, with your team, with your hierarchy, something that you have influence over, and something that you think with stronger leadership skills you could really impact. Okay? All right, so the question was, what do you want to accomplish in this VUCA environment? Yeah. Leaders start to think. And again, the change that you're seeking can be anywhere in the organization. Great, great, great. So figuring out if I'm expecting too much and not enough, beautiful. Building collaborative teams, building inclusiveness, better team cohesion, great. Policy, vision, and direction, reinventing a program, promoting self-care while balancing work, awesome, right? Supporting your staff and helping them feel secure in such a challenging time, good. Clearer roles and responsibilities could be something we could do even during VUCA. All right, self-care, expectations, great. This will be really helpful as we go into part 2. And as we think about how do we work with our remote teams to actually do these things. So keep typing because I'm going to be getting a copy of all of your challenges. Beautiful. Great, everybody keep an eye on great. So Kimberly says she wants to do an effective work plan. So hold on to that idea for a sec for a little bit. Good. Okay. Thank you. Learning Zoom. Oh my gosh, I know. How insane has this been? Like just so much learning has been going on in these very short weeks. So all of this is absolutely so important to hear from you because our work in leading means that we have to begin. We have to begin. Here's what often happens is that we get started, we think we're on a roll, things seem to be going well, and then we end up hitting that second step, and it all begins to fall apart for us. And so thinking about leadership is how do I actually take what I think about leadership and put it into practice so that I can get over that second hump. And that may mean it's time for change within us in terms of actually keeping our eye on what's the most important thing that we need to do. And so in order to help us figure that out, because sometimes it's not always so clear what leaders need to do, the first thing we have to do is decide what kind of environment am I leading in. And this is very foundational to the leadership work that I do around the country and want to share with you today. Ron Heifetz, who is the founder of adaptive leadership theory, put out that there are basically two kinds of work that leaders do. The first kind of work is called technical. And in technical work, everybody sees the work in the same way. So if you look at what it is that you want to do, everybody sees that that's an important thing to happen. And the definition of why it's not happening is clear to everybody, why we need to actually move this forward. And the solution and implementation of the problem is clear. And the primary locus of responsibility for organizing the work is the formal leader. So if you are the supervisor, or if you're the director of, or if you're in charge of something, the primary locus of organizing technical work is in your hands. And I'll just use this webinar as a great example of fabulous technical work. We all understood what it is that we want to accomplish. The TA network knows how to run webinars. They have a wealth of technology people and support people. We worked together. We did practice on WebEx, and all the pieces came together, and voila, we have a webinar. Okay, awesome. We're all on the same page. That's not always the kind of environment and the kinds of challenges that we're in. And, you know, I was looking at your chat, and most of your work, most of the things you said you wanted to do is in the adaptive work arena. And in adaptive work, when we're leading change, there are lots of different perspectives on what's right, what's wrong, ways that we should do things, how we should move forward. And therefore, we don't even, because we all have different perspectives, the definition of the problem isn't clear. Therefore, the solution and implementation is unclear and requires learning. And it used to be in the old days, prior to COVID-19, we would go to meetings, we would have a conversation about what we wanted to accomplish, but the real conversation, where did the real conversation happen after the meeting? Where was it? Anybody want to throw it out in the chat? Where did the real conversation happen after the meeting? In the hallway, in the elevator, near the water cooler. I sometimes say in the parking lot. You know, it would be almost anywhere other than the opportunity to put the harder issues, the one you're not willing to say, onto the table so that everyone has the opportunity to work on it. So here we go. When we think about adaptive work, here's the thing. Once we splinter and go into our own corners and start having all these individual conversations, we are not, as leaders, leveraging the collective intelligence. We are not doing exactly what our job is, which is to bring people together and support and facilitate their conversation. We need to use each other, as this definition says, as resources, leveraging our different perspectives, often across different types of boundaries, which could be the boundaries around families, clinicians, school personnel, child welfare personnel, juvenile justice people. I mean, all across the boundaries, including operations and finance and IT and HR. And all of us, depending upon what it is, need to learn their way to new solutions. I want to put a pin on the word learning. Learning. Our job, leaders, is to create spaces where learning can take place, where we can actually create things that have never happened before. Because when we're in adaptive work, and this is another really helpful checklist for you, as you move forward to know whether you're in technical work or adaptive work, is take a look at this list. Even if we weren't just talking about the response to COVID-19, which would check off many of the things on here. But if you think about all the things that we were working on even prior to COVID-19, we can see that the progress is not linear. We can't manage our way through it. We have to lead. It's a reoccurring problem. It keeps coming back up and up again. Now, this chart kind of tells you a little bit that when we're in technical work, the problem definition is clear, just like we said about the webinar, and expertise is really needed. But in adaptive work, the expertise is in the process of leveraging the collective intelligence. It's the expertise in leveraging the collective intelligence and keeping your teams together and focused on the task at hand. Now, as this chart also shows, everything isn't all adaptive. There are some things that are also technical and will require expertise. And it will be this sort of mix of the two. So the work of leadership in adaptive work, and you can sit on the side of the table to do this, it's using your good process skills to mobilize a group to address an adaptive challenge so that the organization can reset itself and thrive. So in order to differentiate between adaptive and technical work, we have to ask this question. Does making progress on this problem require changes in people's values, their attitudes, or habits of behavior? And if the answer is yes, for all the challenges that you put out there, most of them, the answer would be yes. We are mostly in adaptive work. And as a leader, as I said, you'll do both, of course. There's this process flow. But this last bullet is so important. Don't put a technical solution to an adaptive challenge. Don't just write a policy or a procedure if it's going to require people's values and attitudes and habits to shift. I often think about people, for example, the one that just keeps coming up in so many conversations I have is a workforce, for example, that doesn't put in timesheets, or a workforce that doesn't do expense reports, for example. Or how do we get our people to be comfortable with Zoom? How many workbooks can we develop? How many how-to sheets? Something else might be going on, and they may need some individualized adaptive processes. If you also think of training and technical assistance in this time of COVID, again, think about what your teams really need. Do they need you to support them through facilitation, collaborative decision-making processes, or do we need to really bring in some expert advice and work on our procedures? So let me just jump down here for a second and really hit on the final skills so that we can actually talk about together this idea of creating a space for learning and support so that the change or the new effort can be learned by all. So this idea of creating space, we're going to be talking about it a lot because, and that's really what the focus of the next webinar is really all about, because in this space, a lot has to happen. Now remember, we are in VUCA, right? So if we're thinking about things that are related to volatility, people need to feel grounded and safe and focused so that they can learn, so that they can have these conversations. So if you were to think about a space that you've been in that felt like that kind of space where you felt safe, seen, and heard, where you felt like you could really focus, that you weren't judged, and you could really learn together, what was happening in that space to make it so? And that's for the chat. Think about a space, the last time you were in a space, whether virtual or face-to-face, where you felt safe, seen, and heard, where that leadership was present to allow you to feel that way, and that you felt focused and able to learn what was happening. Beautiful. We acknowledge others. We have active listening. We're non-judgmental. We accept all ideas. We can brainstorm together. We're most creative with plenty of thoughts, creating a room for all ideas, where we seek input from everyone, where we are free from judgment, where we're being authentic and vulnerable, and we welcome questions. We can think together. Now, we have access, leaders, to all of those things all the time. And yet, I would really throw out to you, when we think about creating those spaces, it is rare to find those spaces. Rare. But it's the very kind of space that we need for our people to feel safe, seen, and heard, to focus, and to provide learning. So let's put this into a framework so that you can leave this webinar with sort of a picture of kind of some of the things that you'll need to do in order to help create those spaces and that you can be your leadership best. And I want to offer, in the remaining minutes that we're together before we open it up for questions, are these sort of 6 skills. We'll call them skills. Leadership has a language, which I'm going to share with you as well, so that we'll have a common system of care leadership language. When we finally see each other again, we'll say, Ellen, I got on the balcony and this is what I saw. So here they are. Get on the balcony, identify the adaptive challenge, regulate distress, maintain disciplined attention, create dialogue, and give the work back to the people. Okay, here we go. You guys still with me? I hope. Everybody good out there? All right. So the first thing I wanted to put out there for you is this idea that in uncertainty, and remember, we've got VUCA operating all the time. So we've got the space to create less volatility. And now we need to get up on the balcony and create a little more certainty. It's very hard to know what to do next when we are in such uncertain environments. And there isn't a lot of historical precedent for the kind of challenge that we're in. So we can't really look to the past too much for comparison and guidance. So in this framework, what we do is we get on the balcony to actually gather data. What's going on here? What's happening with my people? Where is the adaptive challenge? What do they need to learn? What's holding us back as a team, as a group, from actually being our best selves? Those insights that you will gain from getting on the balcony will actually offer you the ability to answer the big question is, what is the challenge? What's really happening here? Why isn't my team working at peak performance? Why am I not working at peak performance? But maybe why isn't my team working at peak performance? In uncertain times, insight comes from what you're experiencing and what you hear from other people. It requires you to look up, it requires you to look out, but it also requires you to look within and to look behind you from where you've come, all without rushing to judgment too quickly. If you find yourself rushing to judgment, check your own internal capacity to live with the uncertainty and slow yourself down so that you can determine the next step. It's going to require us to also identify the lack of alignment between what we're trying to move forward with and unproductive reactions to change. And I want to kind of put some of those out there for you just so that you'll be able to observe them when you see them. Unproductive reactions to change are things like pessimism, cynicism, anger, frustration, and complacency. It's sort of that fight, flight, or freeze, or faint kind of reaction because your body feels this as a threat. And so you're going to want to watch for those. You're going to want to see those, and you're going to want to label them and name them. So from the balcony, the key question a leader should have in their hip pocket is not only what challenges are over the horizon, but what new opportunities are over the horizon. And the balcony can give us information that brings us more certainty. And by the way, the research has shown that by sharing even a date with your team in which a decision will be made, for example, brings more certainty and actually brings down the VUCA response in your employees. So what I said was uncertainty also means that you have to put that adaptive challenge on the table. And this is where the hard part comes. I think of all the things in adaptive work. I think how easy it is to have those conversations in the parking lot, but our job as leaders is to put them on the table and ask why and what and how questions so that your team can actually understand what's going on with them and having them figure out the solutions. The difference between what you want to have happen and what is happening in your team is the adaptive challenge. Let me repeat that. The difference between what you want, like team cohesion or better work plans or more vision or more mobilization. That's what you want. And what is, that gap is the adaptive challenge. That's what you're trying to close. And that's what leaders want to help make happen. Like, I'll give you an example. Many of you know me. I can see by the names on the chat. So nice to have people who have experienced the way I like to train, which is face-to-face, hand-to-hand, one-to-one, one-to-group, one-to-team. Let's go. And I have really loved the last 22 years that I have been working with leadership teams and community teams of people in their leadership development. And now all of a sudden COVID comes. And I absolutely cannot go out into the field and deliver the kind of training I know how to do. And so the difference between what I want, which is the face-to-face, versus what is, which is a stay-at-home order, is the adaptive challenge. And what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And there's no one right answer, right? There's no one right answer. And so in adaptive work, I've actually observed myself regulating my own distress, trying to figure this out on how that journey will go for me. And I'll continue with sharing my experience. But I finally had to put the unspoken on the table for myself in this case, and with the people who had hired me to come out and do training in their communities, which is, we may not have face-to-face interactions for a very long time. We may not be able to meet face-to-face. And I have to learn to live with that loss and that disappointment, even as I'm trying to figure out what next. And that's the hard truth about the situation that we're in. And I led myself, and other people led it for me. So once you put that hard issue on the table, my fellow leaders, guess what? You create distress. It's a terrible thing because I don't know, if like you, if you're like me, I want people to be happy. I want people to be joyful. I have no interest in putting like really hard stuff on people's table, but I know that's the leader's job. That's the skill, is to put the work on the table and regulate the distress. Now, in order to regulate distress, we have to create what Ron Heifetz calls a holding environment. And what that means is, going back to that space, a safe place where very difficult adaptive challenges can be discussed, where diversity of opinion is welcomed, where all conventional wisdom is challenged. Stress is not only expected and tolerated, but we actually see it as an engine to help us figure out and push us into the future. Now, if our goal here is to create this very safe space where really difficult things can be discussed, you just talked about what needs to be in place. And I want to say here that the one thing I want to leave you with, in addition to all those wonderful skills, which we're going to talk about on future webinars, is you have to use your presence and composure to defer your own emotional response in order to allow the facilitated learning process to go forward. So if I were in a room and I were to say to you, how many of you feel like you're in it as much as your team? I would probably hear a resounding yes. We are in it just like the rest of our team is. But when we're providing leadership, we hit that choice point. Remember I talked about that choice point, the awareness? The choice point is I have to defer my own emotional response so I can facilitate the work ahead with my team. Now, in a holding environment, just briefly, you will be able to raise the temperature, make things like a little bit harder, draw attention to the tough issues, or you can lower the temperature and take back some responsibility for figuring out what the next moves, the next leadership moves are for the team. So the next key skill, and I really call it a skill because this is where I've seen leaders really deviate from the path ahead. It's called maintaining disciplined attention, fancy word for Focus, focus, focus. Focus, focus, focus. When you put hard things on the table, people are actually not really going to want to actually discuss them. And they might want to do almost anything to even avoid them. So we are going to be the ones to put those on the table and actually ask people to face them, to expose the conflict, to expose the difference between what we want and what is. And we have to remove distractions in order to regain focus. So again, going back to sort of the key words that I keep wanting to sort of reinvigorate here, it's people need to feel safe, seen, and heard. They need to have focus, and they need to learn. And you are the person that makes sure that all of that is happening. And in order to make that happen, the last couple of skills I want to put on the table for us, and such a really important idea here, is the distinction between dialogue and discussion. Discussion is what we normally do. We have an agenda. Everybody presents their agenda. We analyze what people say. We dissect them. We might do some really good brainstorming. But the purpose of the whole discussion is just to make sure that your ideas are heard. You might get some good ideas, but that you walk away and you're pretty much basically in the same space, little better ideas. You also presume in the discussion that the solution is defined and known, that we actually know what to do. But a dialogue is what's needed when we're not even sure what the problem is. Why are we behaving this way? Why aren't we moving forward? Why is there conflict in our team? Why is it that we can't seem to have strategic clarity in where we're going? And when you put the idea out on the table and you ask it in a why, in a how or a what framework, everyone is working together to help figure out what's underneath our inability to move forward, or what do we need to do. We're not even sure what the problem is yet, because we are in complexity, where there's no one answer to the challenges that we're in. And I want to share here that this dialogue, the one thing that has to actually be in place, which you as the leader need to set as the expectation walking in, we can't be non-judgmental completely because we're human. And somehow or another, our neurobiology is wired to make assumptions and judgments. But if we could hold those judgments lightly, if we could actually offer our judgments as one way of seeing something, and if you model that for other people, they will follow your lead, and everyone there can sort of suspend their tight judgment so that we can explore ideas and issues more thoroughly and more authentically. The last skill that I'm going to share with you today is my very favorite of all of them, which kind of releases you of having to have the solution for what it is that your team needs to work on. And that is giving the work of change back to the people with the problem. If the problem is with the team, if the problem is with one set of people in your organization, you can't solve it for them. You cannot solve it for them. And what we want to do as leaders is frame the challenge, because we've gone to the balcony, we've identified the adaptive challenge, we've put it on the table, we've created all this distress and people are unhappy with us and we're bringing them back together again and back together again. And we're really asking people to take initiative to define and solve the problems themselves. Give the work to the people. The quote here is from one of the system of care leaders that I've worked with for a long time. The leaders of today need to step back. You know, it's interesting, I've asked you to step in, and in this moment I've asked you to think about stepping back. And they need to give their people the space and the opportunity to work through really tough challenges. And as I'm sort of sitting here thinking even about what I'm saying, I often think about, are we the fixers? Did we come into this work of helping people, helping communities because we wanted to fix things? Or can we be the people who empower our people and our communities to help fix things themselves? It's like a real nice reframe. So many of us are people who are solution problem solvers. I love that about us. But can we let that go just enough in order to allow our people to work through their own changes and help come up with the solutions that will work for them? And so, as I sort of come to a close on this conversation, what I want to ask you to do in the chat, I want you to think about the following. Think about your challenge, what I asked you about in the beginning of our webinar. What was it that you wanted to impact? And ask yourself, what do I as a leader need to do next? Do I need to get on the balcony because I don't have enough data? I really don't know. I need more insight. Is it that I've gone on the balcony, but I haven't really identified what the challenge is, and I need to get clearer about producing that and putting it on the table for my team? Have I put it on the table, but I haven't regulated distress really well, and it's kind of gone off the rails? So I need to do more in the kind of holding environment skill set, helping people feel safe, seen, and heard, bringing out the presence and the composure and deferring your own emotional response. Have you done all that, but guess what? That conversation happened 2 months ago, and oops, I forgot to bring it back to the table. And do I need to get back to focus, 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 focus? You know, where were you on March 1st? What were those conversations, and do you need to pick them up again? Is it that you need to bring more dialogue in, or have you just forgotten that you don't have to do this all by yourself and you need to give the work of change to the people? So in the chat box, if you wouldn't consider putting out for yourself of those sort of 6 things, what do you need to do next? What's the next step for you in this process of leading change in adaptive work? Beautiful. Beautiful. Yes, thank you, Mary Ann. I think who said that about it's not necessarily linear; it's more iterative. It can be like a slinky. I don't have a really good metaphor for it, but yes, thank you for that. It can ebb and flow, and just when you think you've got focus, 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 some new piece of information puts you back on the balcony. Absolutely. Yeah, I was asking sort of, yes, beautiful, beautiful observation. Great. This is great. So thank you so much for staying with this conversation, for allowing me to share just a little bit about what we've learned in the field of leadership and systems of care, and I'm going to turn it over to Denise. To open it up for questions.
Ellen, are you able to hear me now?
I can hear you, yes.
Great. I was having difficulty here too. There's been several comments in the chat box that I do want to pick up on. One was there was a back and forth both between 3 people, Jacqueline, Nancy, and Norma. There's my Boston accent. It'll always come through. They were commenting about staff, how they want their staff to understand that stress is not a reason to be unprofessional. Do you have guidance on that?
Okay, so first of all, it's a great question. So let me make sure I understand the question. Just because people are stressed, it doesn't mean that they should be unprofessional. So that means that people have gone over the line on their anger or their frustration. Their stress has manifested in a way that feels unprofessional. Is that what I'm understanding from the question? Right. Okay. So if you were to get up on the balcony, here's what I would ask, right? What I would ask is, you're absolutely right. I mean, in our work, even if you are an unpaid person in this work, there is sort of a code of conduct around how we behave together. The bigger question is, what is underlying that stress and that anger, and the question of what you need to do next. So is it that this is with one person, or is this with the group? And I would almost say that having a conversation with a group around why is this work so hard right now, and putting it on the table that, guess what, when I get triggered, I act unprofessional. And who amongst us has not done that once or twice in their life? And with this happening, so you can normalize that that's happening, but at the same time, you set the expectation. This is putting that adaptive challenge on the table and actually asking the group, how do we make sure that this doesn't happen again? And what would we want to put into place when someone feels as though they're stepping over the line, so everyone can be their best self? And you don't have to solve that, because the group has to solve it. If everyone is feeling this sense of stress, even though someone has crossed the line, I am certain it's the kind of conversation that would be helpful to many of us, especially in this time.
That's so helpful. Shannon has in the box, I wonder what unprofessional has that been defined, and maybe something we can go deeper into when we meet next week.
Yeah, and actually that's a great question to Denise. Thank you. Who asked that question?
That's Shannon Crossbear. I'm
awesome.
Sure you know Shannon.
Yeah.
Right?
My God. Hi, Shannon. Shout out. Yeah, that's a great question. And isn't that a great question for the team to respond to, right? Isn't that a great question to ask everyone? What is our code of professionalism, and how do we want to be? And how would we know? How would we know if someone was really crossing the line? And to see it more as a collective responsibility to help keep everyone in that place of feeling safe, seen, and heard, so that nobody has to cross the edge if they can.
Yeah, that's so helpful. Ellen, I want to go back way in the beginning. Nancy made a comment, and I don't want to lose it. She said she's actually found that her leadership skills are stronger than they were before, but she's not sure that those above her are able to see what she's been working with on her team. So here's the question. How do we let those who work above us know about our own leadership?
Great. I mean, how interesting that question, especially because we're now all working remotely. So, if I was in a room, I'd probably throw the question right back out to Nancy, because I bet she actually knows the answer to this or has many possibilities for it. So let me just throw out a couple. The first one is, what would prevent any of us from requesting more conversations with people up and out from our team? Not only just to update them, but to actually gather their wisdom and their perspective into the work that we are doing, and to create the opportunities to showcase the progress that the team has made, even under these extraordinary circumstances. So that could mean a one-on-one with Nancy and her supervisor, or it could mean Nancy invites her supervisor into her collective and let the team share with her supervisor how much progress that they have made in the last 2 months.
That's great. Thank you. Throwing it right back at you there, Nancy. So Jaden made the comment early on about the challenge of bringing people together again just feels so different. And there seems to be a version of a bystander syndrome. where everyone waits for the next person to respond. How can we make sure that we have the right people at the table?
Oh, that's a really great question. How can we make sure that we have the right people at the table? Okay, so remember at the very beginning of the webinar, I talked about preparation, right? So this is, and for all the leaders out there that I want to just say to you, this isn't a time for improv, right? This isn't the time for catch as catch can. This is the time for really thoughtful and strategic questions to yourself. So I would imagine that very often, sometimes when we want to do something, we just throw out the invitation and see who comes. Or we have some sort of idea where it's the people that have always showed up, or like one from column A and one from column B, and we keep our circles small. I mean, this is a time for us to be super strategic. I can't think of a better time to build a new relationship, to actually foster the opportunity for people to link and network. People are craving sort of that more intimate interaction with each other. So if I were thinking about whatever initiative I have and who needs to be at the table, I would literally sit down with myself and I would look at what it is that I'm working on, and I would ask myself this question. I would draw myself like in the center, and then I would draw all the people that I would typically consider who would be at my table, and then I would step back and I would ask myself a very strategic question, which is, who's missing? Who, not only who's missing, but what system is missing? What agency is missing that will help me actually galvanize my work forward? And we've done this kind of work in something called strategic alliances. Like, who are the strategic allies that I need to have in order to be successful? And I don't know what the situation is, so I can't answer it, Denise, like directly. But those are precisely the questions. And then the process is preparation.
Again, helpful. And we can go further into our next two discussions, too, with Ellen in June and July. There's a question that we don't have time to talk about now, Ellen, but it really poses the opportunity to consider what we interpret as unproductive reactions. And too often we dismiss and write off. And you had said it's hard to jump to judgment, right? So we can go further into that perhaps next month.
Yeah. And Denise, can I just jump in on that for just 1 second? So interesting. So absolutely, I want to just put an exclamation mark on that. Let's flip it. There are productive reactions to change. People who are working through their own adaptive process, and they work it through. It's not easy. It's hard. When we see unproductive reactions, it's not judged as negative. All that means for us as leaders is that's where the work is, right? That's where we need to be focusing our attention and supporting our people to actually become and step into the process. When you get your copies of the PowerPoint, you're going to see a PowerPoint I didn't cover, which is Prochaska's Stages of Change. And many of you have been exposed to this literature because of your clinical background, but it's the same in leadership and organizational change. Folks that are way back in pre-contemplation and aren't even really sure what they're supposed to be doing don't need to be dinged. They need to be addressed and engaged in a very specific way. And so it just means we have more work to do as adaptive leaders.
So helpful, so helpful. There was a question or a request from Carrie Dallas for the list. You rattled off a bunch of balcony words, and we need to get that list out to folks. I couldn't type them quick enough. We'll make sure that we send them and follow up to this meeting today. We will, as we said at the beginning and throughout, we will be sending everybody a recording, as well as the resources shared in the chat box, and as well as a reminder to join us for the next two in this series, as well as the two other remaining meetings we have as part of the Systemic Care Leadership Learning Community. We want to again thank you on behalf of Ellen, Beth, myself, the Institute, the TA Network, thank you again for joining us today. And as someone put in the chat box, and I'm sorry I can't remember the name, might have been Nikea, please make sure self-care is so, so important. So please do make sure that you take care of yourselves while taking care of others. Also, thank you to Sarah for hosting us today, and thank you to Kelly and Noelle for joining us. The ASL interpretation has been fabulous. Thank you very much. See you next month.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you, Ellen.